This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, strap in, everyone, because today we are diving deep, really deep, into the roots of racism toward African Americans in the U.S. And let me tell you, the range of sources you all have sent in for this deep dive, wow, we've got historical analyses, academic papers, even a clip from like a history podcast.
It seems like you're really aiming to grasp this issue from every angle.
Absolutely. And by the end of this, I hope, well, I really believe that you'll not just know the events, the dates, but you'll really get the why, like the underlying beliefs, the systems that shaped this really tragic part of American history. So, ready to get a little uncomfortable?
Let's get uncomfortable.
Let's do it. So, slavery, obviously, like a huge dark stain on U.S. history, right? But what's crazy to me is how religion was twisted to justify it. It's just like shocking to me.
Yeah, it really is. It's a powerful example of how even the most sacred beliefs can be manipulated to serve pretty awful agendas. Like take the curse of Ham from the Bible, for instance.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
It was totally taken out of context. I mean, completely twisted to argue that, that African people were inherently cursed, destined for servitude.
Wow. So basically, using God to justify the unjustifiable, it's chilling how deeply that idea kind of permeated society, you know?
It did. And alongside those twisted religious justifications, you see this cultural xenophobia emerge, too. It's this fear of anything different.
So it wasn't just about like skin color then. It was about erasing an entire cultural identity.
Exactly. And we see that in how things like African American vernacular English, a vibrant, evolving dialect, it gets mocked as like a sign of ignorance.
Instead of being recognized as, like you said, a vibrant part of culture.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so as like science progressed, did these justifications try to become more, well, scientific?
Oh, absolutely. The 18th and 19th centuries saw the rise of so-called scientific racism, where figures like Samuel Morton, they started using things like skull measurements, you know.
Wait, hold on. They thought they could measure intelligence based on skull size?
Yeah.
Seriously?
You laugh now, but these theories were taken very seriously then.
It's wild how they manipulated or like tried to manipulate data to fit their prejudices. It's almost like this science was just a tool for maintaining power control.
It absolutely was.
So then you have Darwin, right? His theory of evolution, groundbreaking. But even that gets distorted.
Oh, yeah, big time. Social Darwinism comes on the scene in the late 19th century, and they're applying survival of the fittest to racial hierarchies.
Okay, so they take survival of the fittest and are basically saying, see, white Europeans are more evolved, destined to rule.
Precisely. Proponents, people like Herbert Spencer, they completely ignore the impact of history, of society, centuries of slavery and oppression.
And just decide to say that African Americans are inherently inferior.
Yeah, they twisted it to fit their narrative.
It's just amazing how these supposedly objective scientific principles, right, used to justify their own, like, totally subjective biases.
It's a pattern we see throughout history, unfortunately.
So, okay, slavery is finally abolished. Do these prejudices just vanish? Like, poof. Gone.
If only it were that simple. Sadly, no. Those prejudices, they morph, they adapt. And one of the most damaging stereotypes, the ones that really sticks around, is this linking of Blackness with criminality.
Ugh, we're still dealing with that today. How did that even start?
Well, after the Civil War, you have many southern states enacting these black codes, Jim Crow laws. They say it's for order, but really it's about controlling black people.
Right, I've heard of these, like, vagrancy laws. Was that part of this system?
Absolutely. Many formerly enslaved people, that they had nothing,
Sure.
No home, no land, forced to wander for work, for just a place to live.
And these laws basically made it a crime to be poor, to be homeless.
Exactly. It disproportionately targeted black people, gave an excuse to arrest, imprison them.
So even basic survival, seeking employment, could land you in trouble.
Exactly. And then you have this thing called the convict leasing system, basically a loophole for continued forced labor, even after slavery is abolished.
Oh, wait.
Oh, yeah. Black people arrested for minor things, sometimes nothing at all, then leased out to private companies. Brutal conditions.
So it wasn't even about actual crime. It was about exploiting black labor under this guise of, like, law and order.
You got it.
And to make matters worse, media at the time, films like The Birth of a Nation, It just added fuel to the fire.
Absolutely. Portraying black men as dangerous, as threats,
Mhm.
really stoked that fear and prejudice among white audiences.
It's like this awful cycle. You criminalize their existence, then point to the people you've unjustly imprisoned as proof of their inherent criminality. Just messed up.
It is, it is. And unfortunately, even when the fight for racial justice starts gaining momentum, it gets tangled up in Cold War anxiety.
We're talking about the civil rights movement, right? What's that got to do with the Cold War?
Well, during the Red Scare, anything that challenged the status quo was at risk of being labeled communist.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Civil rights leaders, organizations like, W.E.B. Du Bois, the NAACP, they're
Yeah.
called communist sympathizers?
And the fight for equality is somehow framed as, like, un-American.
Exactly. A
Yeah.
threat to national security. It was a cynical tactic, but really effective, allowed those sort of opposed to civil rights to see it as like a patriotic duty to be against it.
Wow. So using the fear of communism to distract from the real issues of racial injustice at home.
And it worked both domestically and internationally. The U.S. government could deflect criticism from other nations, all while ignoring the systemic racism within their own borders. It's kind of like they weaponized this fear, making it harder for real progress to happen.
So we've talked about, like, the big forces that shape these racist attitudes, these systems, but what about the everyday experiences of African Americans? Like, how did all this actually play out in real life?
Well, that's where the real human cost of racism becomes just undeniable. From the very start, slavery wasn't just about labor. It was about dehumanization, ripping families apart, subjecting people to unimaginable cruelty.
It's hard to even grasp the trauma inflicted over centuries of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even after slavery is abolished, that trauma, it doesn't just disappear. It echoes through generations.
You mentioned those vagrancy laws earlier. How did those specifically target Black people after the Civil War?
Think about it. You're newly freed. You've got nothing. No home, no land. You're forced to wander looking for work, for a place to rebuild your life. And then, boom, these laws make it a crime to be poor, to be homeless.
So even just trying to survive could land you in jail.
Exactly. And then, to make matters worse, you have this convict leasing system, this horrific loophole that allowed for basically slavery under a different name.
I mean, how? We talked about it a bit before, but it's so hard to grasp that this was happening just a few generations ago.
It was. Black people arrested for the smallest offenses, sometimes for nothing at all, and then leased out as free labor.
Just awful. And what about segregation? I mean, separate schools, water fountains, everything. That constant message of separation, of inequality. How did that shape lives?
Well, segregation wasn't just about physical separation, right? It was a constant message. You are not good enough.
It's like, you don't belong, you're less than.
Exactly. Black children went to underfunded schools. Black adults denied opportunities, healthcare, housing.
It's just constant. This message that you are less than simply because of your skin color.
It took a huge toll. Mental, emotional well-being of entire communities. But even amidst this, there were these incredible moments of resilience, of creativity.
The Harlem Renaissance comes to mind, right? This incredible explosion of art, music, literature.
Exactly. The Harlem Renaissance was a powerful testament to the human spirit, to create beauty and meaning even in the face of such adversity.
But even something so positive, I'm guessing, faced pushback.
Unfortunately, yes. Even art was seen as threatening by some. That fear of Black progress, of Black autonomy, it was always lurking.
And that fear, it showed up in so many ways, right? From the brutality of lynchings to those more subtle forms of discrimination we still see today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And some of those patterns are still with us, even if they're not as overt as they once were.
Earlier, we were talking about the criminalization of Blackness. How does that show up in today's world?
It's complex, but one very clear example is mass incarceration. The system is often stacked against Black people from the start. Racial profiling, sentencing disparities, it goes on and on.
So it's not just about a few bad apples, like a few racist cops. It's about the whole system being set up in a way that disadvantages Black people.
Exactly. It's built into the very foundation. And we see similar patterns in education, healthcare, housing, almost every area of life.
These invisible barriers, right, always present simply because of the color of your skin.
It's the insidious nature of systemic racism. Even when people have the same qualifications, the same work ethic, the playing field is rarely level.
So given how deep all of this is, how do we even begin to dismantle it? It feels so huge, almost impossible.
It is a huge challenge, but not impossible. We need to push for policy changes that address the root causes of this inequality. Support organizations doing the work on the ground. Hold our leaders accountable.
So it's like a combo, right? Top-down and bottom-up change.
Exactly. And it's going to be a long process. There's no quick fix, no easy answers. We need to be in it for the long haul.
And speaking of long hauls and difficult topics, we got to talk about white privilege.
Oh, yes. The term that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But honestly, it's crucial to understanding how racism actually works.
Yeah, I think people hear white privilege and they get defensive, like it's an accusation or something.
It's not about guilt-tripping anyone. It's just stating a fact. In a system built on racial hierarchy, your race can give you an advantage, whether you want it to or not.
So, like, acknowledging that the playing field isn't level, that being white comes with certain built-in benefits?
Exactly. And those unearned advantages, no matter how small they might seem, they add up. They have a real impact.
Can you give us some examples? Like, how does this play out in everyday life?
Think about something as simple as walking into a store. A white person can generally assume they won't be followed by security, They can browse without feeling suspicion just because of their skin color.
I never even thought about that. It's like this invisible shield, right? I never even noticed I was carrying it.
And it goes beyond just shopping. It's about representation in positions of power, media portrayals, whose voices get heard, whose experiences are considered normal.
It's like being white is the default setting and everyone else is the other. And that otherness can have serious consequences.
Absolutely. It impacts job opportunities, interactions with law enforcement, even how your pain is perceived and addressed. It affects everything.
So, given how deeply embedded this seems to be, how do we address it?
The first step is simply acknowledging that it exists, and then using that awareness to amplify the voices of those who don't have those advantages, to challenge those systems of oppression, to advocate for real change.
It's not about feeling bad, it's about doing something with that knowledge, right?
Exactly. It's about understanding our interconnectedness. A society that values and uplifts everyone benefits everyone.
Powerful stuff. So understanding white privilege is like essential to the fight against racism.
It's all connected. We can't address one without addressing the other. It's like trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces.
Q, I gotta say, that was a lot. I mean, we really went deep on some tough stuff today, huh? Like from the twisted ways they justified slavery all the way to how racism is still woven into our society. Even now it's been, well, heavy. But you know what? I actually feel hopeful.
I love that. Seriously, it's easy to get bogged down by how big this problem is. But knowledge is power, right? And now you've got this whole new understanding of it all.
It's not just about knowing history for history's sake. It's about, like, becoming a better citizen, a more understanding human,
Absolutely. And ultimately, more equipped to push for change.
So where do we go from here? Like, we've explored the why, the historical roots, but what about the how? How do we actually combat racism in today's world? It feels so massive sometimes. Like, what can one person even do?
It's easy to feel powerless, for sure. But the thing is, individual actions do matter. It's like those ripples in a pond, right? They spread.
Okay, but get specific with me. What can I do that actually makes a difference?
Well, first off, never stop learning. This deep dive, great start, but it's a stepping stone, right? There are tons of books, documentaries, podcasts out there that go even deeper into specific issues.
So it's like treating this as an ongoing education, always learning more.
Super important. The more you understand the details, the better you'll be at spotting racism when you see it, calling it out, having those tough conversations.
And I guess it's not all about, like, leading protests and stuff, right?
No way. Those small, everyday choices make a difference, too. Like challenging a racist joke when you hear one, thinking about which businesses you support with your money.
Like voting with your wallet, but for social justice.
Exactly. Supporting businesses owned by people of color, thinking about where your food comes from. All those choices send a message.
Okay, I can get behind that. But let's be real, those conversations about race, they can be tough. What do you do when someone just doesn't get it? Or worse, they actually disagree with you.
That's the tough one. No easy answers there. But I think listening is key. Like really trying to understand where they're coming from. Even if you totally disagree with them.
Even if they're saying something like offensive.
Well, obviously, I'm not saying tolerate hate speech. Yeah. But if it's someone you care about, sometimes asking questions is more powerful than just shutting them down.
Like, help me understand why you think that.
Exactly. It might not change their mind right then and there, but it plants a seed, And sometimes a seed of doubt is all it takes to start something growing.
It takes a lot of patience, though, right?
It does. But hey, Think about the folks who fought for civil rights. They had patience for decades. We can handle a few awkward dinner conversations.
True, true. So, education, everyday choices, tough conversations, anything else.
Oh yeah, don't forget supporting the organizations that are on the ground doing the work. Donating, volunteering, sharing their message on social media.
So it's about putting your money, your time where your mouth is?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
No.
It's not just about talking the talk, it's about walking the walk too. And remember, this isn't a one and done thing. It's a journey. We're all learning, unlearning, relearning as we go.
No pressure to be perfect, just to keep trying to do better.
Exactly. And we're going to mess up sometimes. It's part of being human. The key is to learn from it, keep moving forward.
So, listener, I know that was a lot of info today, but I hope more than anything you're feeling not just informed, but like empowered.
That's the goal. Understanding how we got here is just step one. What matters most is what we do with this knowledge.
Right. So as you go about your day, think about this. What's one thing, even something small, that you can do to challenge racism? Could be a conversation, a donation, even just paying closer attention to what's happening around you. Change starts small, but it can have a huge impact. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.